The Play 3 from Xiaomi has just been released here in China. I went down to the shop to have a look. Now the specs may not get you very excited. There's a lot of other phones with way better specs than this, but the price might do. It's 1,099 RMB here in China. That's under $200 US. So let's see what Xiaomi can do with the low price tag. Well, actually, for a cheaper phone, certainly compared with other flagships, the design is actually really good. You might think that they still have really big top and bottom bezels, but the Play 3 has a really nice teardrop design for the front camera, and the bottom bezel is pretty large, but it doesn't feel clunky. Most Android phones anyway now have a thicker chin than they do a top bezel. This one's no exception. Obviously, with a phone on the cheaper side, the bezels are going to be slightly bigger than you would get in more expensive phones. Having said that, I think the design overall on the front is really nice. The notch is certainly smaller than Apple's. The screen colors are decent. The pixel density isn't amazing, but actually Xiaomi have been quite clever in their design here. The operating system puts bright or vivid colors at the bottom of the phone, and almost always on every screen it will turn progressively darker up to black in the top of the phone. This is their method of essentially hiding any of the top bezels and that teardrop camera. You can actually see when you go through some of the screens, when you're on the main screens and you're just flicking through apps, it goes almost pitch black at the top of the phone. When you drag a screen down or you go into a screen with pure white background, you can just see that camera sticking out. I personally don't really mind camera notches or bezels like that. I think the teardrop design for the front camera is actually really good. Xiaomi have decided that they want to hide that on most screens. That's obviously up to them. Apart from that, something I found a little strange was just how the app design wasn't really ubiquitous between all the apps. Some of the Xiaomi apps had a circular or a rounded design. Some of the third-party apps, obviously downloaded from their app store, had a square design. It just added to this feeling of a slightly rushed device or a rushed product. I get that third-party manufacturers maybe design apps in different ways, but on other more expensive Xiaomi products, they seem to get it right. So I'm not sure why they couldn't just do it on this device. That front screen is a 1080 by 2280 Full HD screen on paper. In person, it's definitely not the sharpest screen you're gonna find. The colors are okay, but it's not incredibly bright or incredibly sharp. At this price level, it definitely gets the job done. It's a 5.84, basically almost 6-inch screen. But actually the phone feels really small. Considering that the bezels are very small, top certainly, the bottom does have a thicker bezel, but all in all, there aren't huge bezels on this device. The design of the device in total comes out really like a small phone. Obviously with the price tag, there's no under-screen fingerprint technology, there's no Face ID, but you do get the normal fingerprint on the back. As the phone is small, certainly compared to most of the other flagships we're seeing, the fingerprint sensor on the back is really easily accessible. Actually, I quite like the design on the back. It just comes round from the front of the screen in a curved shape. This adds to the teardrop nature of the phone. It's small, it's lightweight, it's compact. There's no fuss in the design. It's very simple, and I personally like that. I think the camera design on the back is really good as well. It just is a vertical design. Now, the camera doesn't have optical image stabilization, but Xiaomi say they do give you electronic image stabilization. I tested that out. It is decent. It's not going to blow you away. I certainly prefer optical image stabilization, but again, with the price, that's something that we're going to have to give up with this one. When I was shooting pictures in the shop, actually, I didn't think the camera was that bad. The images were decent. I thought the color reproduction was quite good. I thought the clarity was pretty good. A problem that I did find is that if I was tapping the screen to go from a light area to a dark area, it was just a little bit slow and a little bit sluggish in changing the brightness of the screen. Having said that, all in all, I think, again, looking at the price, this is a decent camera. You do get two lenses in that camera at the back. The front camera is an 8 megapixel. The photos with that one were, again, very usable. Not the sharpest, not the brightest, but it definitely does the job pretty well. You also have lots of beauty modes, as is standard with these phones. One thing I will say about the camera, which is really annoying, is that whenever you take a photo, Xiaomi put a watermark on the bottom left-hand side. There is really not a single person on the entire planet who would want that watermark on their photos. I looked inside to try and remove it, and obviously the phone being in Chinese, I couldn't do it. I'm sure you can turn that off in the settings, and if you do get the phone, that is one of the first things that you're going to be doing. The specs sheet in the shop told me that the processor was something called a P35 at 2.3 gigahertz. Okay, so that one had me a little bit stumped. Flicking through the phone, going in and out of apps is absolutely no problem. It has 4 gigabytes of RAM, which for Android is cutting it quite thin. Using it on a daily basis, going in and out of your messaging app and the email app and some other things, you're not going to have any issues. If you start multitasking, maybe gaming, doing some other things, watching movies, that's where memory management may become a little bit of an issue. If you're in 1 or 2 apps taking up a lot of memory, your other apps might have to be shut down. If you flick back into them, you're gonna have to restart them again. However, on a daily basis, when you're just using the phone 90% of the time, I don't think you're gonna see much problems. It also comes with 64 gigabytes of RAM, not a lot by Android standards. There also isn't an SD card slot for putting your own memory in there. I would say with this phone, considering what you'll probably use it for and considering the camera, 64 gigs is probably adequate. And anyway, if you have an iPhone, 64 gigs is actually quite a lot. It has a 3000 milliamp hour battery. That's a good sized battery for what would be considered a smaller phone. That's a pretty big battery that's going to last you all day. There's no quick charging in this one, however, and it's a mini USB port to charge it, not USB-C. Unfortunately, with the price of the phone being lower, they couldn't stump up for the USB-C connector. I really don't know how much more expensive that is compared to mini USB, but for me it just seems like they're putting an old, out-of-date connector in the phone simply to make it look worse than maybe some of the more expensive phones. In any case, if you're in an Android household, you'll probably have loads of those connectors lying around anyway. No USB-C, but I'm sure a lot of you will be happy to know that they have kept the headphone jack. All in all, I would say the phone is just functional and practical. The design isn't spectacular, but it does the job. It's well put together. The volume rocker and the power button are nice and clicky. Everything's in the place that you expect it to be. The operating system is kind of basic, but again, everything is just where you expect it to be. Obviously, because it's in the budget category, they haven't spent a lot of time on the design or the feel of the phone in terms of the operating system, but everything's there as you need it. The camera isn't sluggish, it does the job. Again, not amazing, but it just does the job. Actually, the hardware here, I've not got a problem with. I think that the main problem, if there is one with the phone, is the operating system. You can tell that Xiaomi just haven't put a lot of time and effort or love into making the operating system. I like the fact that they put lighter colors at the bottom and darker colors at the top to hide the V camera cutout, but personally I think they should have owned the V. It actually looks really nice. Like I said before, the apps just seem like they don't follow a certain design. Some apps are square, some apps are circle, but the actual functionality of those apps has no problems. You're just limited by the Xiaomi App Store. So for 1,099 RMB here in China, you get a really decent bit of hardware. A useful phone with pretty much everything that you're gonna want, including a headphone jack. It's 1/10 of the price of an iPhone. It's certainly not 1/10 of the quality, in the hardware anyway. So if you're looking to buy a phone and not spend over $200, 1,000 RMB here in China, you can't really go too wrong with the hardware in this thing. But I can just tell that they've made the operating system look and feel a little bit clunky, even compared to more expensive Xiaomi devices.